Hey everyone, welcome back to the Global Medical Device Podcast. My name is Etienne Nichols. I'm the host for today's episode. With me today is Simon Mason to talk about Nest, which is a part of the Medical Device Innovation Consortium. Simon Mason is the president of Nest, and Nest serves as a dual role in the medical device ecosystem as a coordinating center offering services that catalyze real-world evidence, which is one of the things I'm interested in talking about today with him. But also to generate that for the medical device and health technology research sponsors and as a collaborative community comprised of representatives from across the medical device ecosystem, working together to develop thought leadership and coalesce diverse stakeholders to advance innovation and understanding on initiatives of importance. Prior to Nest, Simon has a history of building and selling private equity-backed healthcare service companies, and hopefully he can help make what I just said make a little bit more sense. But Simon, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and I do intend to make it a little bit clearer.
Really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Yeah, why don't we just go ahead and dive in and tell us what Nest does and how it helps medical device companies?
Yeah, happy to do that. So Nest was created by industry and FDA as a partnership prior to MDUFA 4, and part of the MDUFA 4 commitment, they agreed to set aside MDUFA fees funds coming through the FDA to Nest to work on a number of key initiatives, and the primary one we're talking about today is to catalyze the use of real-world evidence. Um, as such, we are a nonprofit. We sit under the MDIC, which is a trades-based and FDA-supported organization. And in fact, FDA sits on the board of MDIC and sits on our governing committee, which is our board as well. So we have very strong ties back and forth within the agency and across to industry, who also sit on our boards. For the first period of Nest, which is really MDUFA 4, Nest invested significantly in research and development, trying to understand what are the issues within the real world evidence space, what could be done to solve for that, testing out different methods, and so on. So it was really the R&D phase, if you will. Then with MDUFA 5, which was end of 2022, effectively kicked into gear last year. That's when I joined to lead the organization. And all of the stakeholders asked us to pivot the organization more into more of a business acumen, thinking like a startup organization, whose job was to go out there and take the knowledge from the research that had been done and actually execute on that, and use those learnings in order to support projects where actual submissions were being made to FDA using real world evidence, perhaps in areas that had been problematic in the past, but as a way to test the real world evidence. And since that time, we're happy to report that we had an approval last year. We had a clearance earlier this year, actually not that very recently. And we have a number of other projects that are underway right now with sponsors working with us with the FDA to get them over the line. So watch this space between now and the end of this year. So that's kind of roughly what we've been up to over the last 6, 7 years.
That's really cool. So the real world evidence that you're helping generate, can you help me understand that a little bit better? How is that working? Or how does that work?
Well, the simple answer is that real world evidence, of course, is evidence that's collected in the real world. So the challenge with it is that the theory and the promise of real world evidence is data is being collected all the time, and instead of when a company is getting ready to submit for approval, instead of having to run a clinical study, which they have to begin and end over some period of time in the future. They can go backwards into time and look at data that's already been collected and use that as a proxy for what they might have collected through a clinical study. Now, clinical studies are timely, can be expensive, and in theory, real world evidence has already been collected. So there's a lot of sunk cost built into that, which will not be repeated. The challenge with that is that if the data were collected in the past sufficiently equivalent to what is being collected in the study, we would have no issues. But obviously, the data that's collected in the past, in many cases, wasn't collected with a submission in mind, as an
That'd be
example.
clean data. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's going to have potential challenges associated with it. They may not have collected enough of it. So all these things have to be put together. And so that's essentially what real world evidence is and where some of the challenges come from. And I'm happy to talk through it a little bit more on the what we do to solve that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear. So, just kind of, I'll read back to you what I'm kind of hearing myself. So, the real world data, that's what's generated all the time. Real world evidence is generated from that real world data, kind of extracting the clean and the usable information from that real world data. Is that accurate or right?
I mean, neither the data or the evidence are necessarily clean. The evidence is the evidence is the information in the data that actually supports a claim, supports a
Okay.
specific use of a product, or and in many cases that can be off-label use. So if it's being used off-label, that it's being recorded, that's an opportunity to get that product on label in the future by using that data instead of having to go off and collect more data. But cleanliness is in the eye of the beholder when it comes to this. And ultimately, we have to make sure that we measure up to what the FDA's definition of cleanliness is.
Absolutely. And cleanliness might not even be the right word, controlled or relevant, accurate. So, yeah, it's a really good point. So those are important clarifications. Can you explain how Nest acts as that neutral conduit between the industry and the FDA?
Well, we do that largely by how we were formed. So Nest was originally put together between FDA leadership and the industry representatives that were involved in MDIC and in the MDUFA negotiations. It was agreed that we would be set up and created a specific way. So we are, as I mentioned, a nonprofit. We have the funding does come through grant from the FDA, but uses MDUFA fees to pay for it. So in other words, the industry are the investors. They give it to the FDA, and the FDA then provides it to us through the grant mechanism. And our governance structure is quite well prescribed in terms of containing industry representatives, FDA representatives, patient advocates, institutional representatives, and so on, so that we have a broad range of stakeholders that are committed to us. But what is, I think, unique about us is that we have FDA sitting on our governance committee, and as well as industry and everybody else. And so we're able to create a sort of a neutral ground where we operate with all of those folks. And each group has a vested interest to bring us inside their organization. So we're either working directly within the sponsors' organizations to help them figure out how a particular project might work or not work. But FDA equally steps up and provides us with unparalleled access to the organization to help get these projects through and help teach and educate as it comes to real world evidence.
Okay. So if I'm a medical device company or I'm working in a early stage medical device company, I'm assuming early stage would be the ones that would get a lot of benefit from this, but maybe not. At what point in the design and development lifecycle would they engage with Nest? What does that look like?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that, and not necessarily early stage. I mean, we do have, we work with big companies, we work with small companies. It doesn't really matter. I think obviously the projects are going to be more complex class two, class three products likely in the space, because otherwise they wouldn't need real world evidence to get it
Sure.
across the line. They're probably going to know whether or not they're a good candidate, and by that I mean they're aware of potentially data that exists out there today that could be used to support a submission. It could be data that's being collected off label that I mentioned. Pediatric use, of course, is one enormous example of that, where they have an approved product in the adult population, but they know it's being used off label in pediatrics. It could be data that exists in other parts of the world that they might have used for an approval, or they're where it's available in the registry or something like that. So they're probably going to know more about the opportunities, and that's why we see a lot of companies coming to us, bringing opportunities to us, because they say, listen, this data's here. We have some concerns about this, that, and the other. How can we work through this process to get it done? And the only thing stopping us from being completely overwhelmed with opportunities, because we do get a lot of opportunities brought to us, is that not enough companies know about us. So it's despite the fact we're in the MDUFA commitment letter, which I don't think everyone reads every day, but it is using venues like this that we want to get the word out.
Okay. So, and my understanding then, it would be a company that's most likely post-market. They already have a product on the market. It's already being used and potentially, like you said, that off-label use and to expand those label indications. That's one of the goals or one of the real uses here.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely that's one opportunity. I mean, pre-market is always a possibility if data exists for one reason or another. So it's going to vary a little bit. I mean, it runs the gamut.
Yeah.
But if it's a novel product that's not existed before and is not available anywhere else, then likely it's they're not going to be using this real world evidence approach. But they might be able to collect real world evidence concurrently and use that as a as a support to their existing submission and things like that as they move forward.
Okay. Do you have any examples of companies or products that have gone through this process and how you've been able to help them?
Um, well, we have test cases, which if you go to our website, there is a description of each of the test cases on there in terms of now. None of those actually got through to a submission. So since that time, we have the two that we talked about. The one with Johnson & Johnson, there was an approval last year, and the one with intuitive surgery, which is in the robotic surgery space, which was a clearance this year. So those involved usage of the product in different settings that was able to be converted over and then used to support the process here. The intuitive one, which I think is what you guys picked up on, is in the robotic surgery space, in the prostatectomy space. The device is being used. It's not approved in that specific window, and they were able to use the data that was available out there today to convert and get a clearance based upon that. So it's but the pediatric space is something we're really interested in because a lot of companies see pediatric off-label use as a particularly challenging avenue. Obviously, the device is being used, and therefore revenues are coming in, and but they can't support the use of the product in that space. Yet, the regulators often are quite a bit more concerned about when they see pediatric submissions. And so this is one way that if we can lower the barrier of cost and effort in use of real world evidence, we hope that more companies will actually pursue the pediatric angle. And in fact, our governing committee also contains pediatric patient advocacy representatives who are helping us to sort of motivate the marketplace and move it forward. Because I think it's really the one area where we can make a difference, and it's part of our mission to make sure we do that.
In those case studies, do you talk about the cost of it? I mean, I could imagine the cost associated or the savings from using real world evidence as opposed to a traditional clinical trial, or maybe the time savings. But do you have an idea of the impact there?
We're actually just started working on some of the sort of ROI analysis based upon this, but the all things being equal, a real world evidence study is going to be quicker, cheaper to actually perform, and is going to get the product approved quicker. So so there's a couple of different variables we're working with here. Number one, the cost of running a clinical study is generally in the millions. And doing a real world evidence study is under $1 million, and could be significantly less depending on the work that's being done. Two, if the approval happens quicker, then depending on what the product is, it may see increased usage. It may see 100% increase in usage. It all depends, and therefore that turns into potential revenue for the organization. So if you, but we've also had case studies where sponsors have told us that if they had not gotten that approval in the time that we were talking about, the competitive situation was such that they were going to see market erosion. So they were actually protecting against market erosion, which at the end of the day, not the most exciting thing that you're not showing a massive increase, but you are showing no decrease or a limited decrease, and that could be quite significant. And one of the case studies, they estimated that this was probably going to save them about $200 to $300 million in market erosion. And of course, if they had waited and gone through the traditional process, by the time they got the approval, they perhaps wouldn't have seen some of that slowdown in erosion.
So you got me curious about the fact that Nest is funded through the MDUFA fees. What would you say to medical device companies? What is there any reason they wouldn't utilize your services? And maybe a better question is, what do they need to bring you to really properly utilize your services?
Well, we're not the solution to all. I mean, the MDUFA fees are paid by all companies
Yeah.
and go into the FDA, and then the FDA has to use those fees not only to take care of the submissions that are coming through, but they also have they have a responsibility to improve across the board in terms of understanding real world evidence and many other related areas. So there's a certain subset of fairly large subset of companies that can benefit from what we do. What do they need to bring us is really the opportunity is a couple things. We look for in any project, we look for a patient benefit, first and foremost. So we want to see that we're having an impact on patients' lives as a result of this, whether it's getting a product more readily available or simply approved. Second thing is we want ideally a knowledge of where data might exist to support this. We'll work with the sponsor to go out and identify additional data sets if that's not sufficient, but it's often much easier. They say that we come in and we've been working with, for example, this registry group and they've got this data and we think we can use it, but we see some challenges. Third is they obviously have to claim that something they're looking to do, right? I mean, I know that sounds like a silly question, but trust me, we have conversations with companies where they're just spitballing on different ideas. We need them to be a little bit more prescribed in terms of what they're looking for. And then fourth, we look for ways in which we can use the information, the project to test something like a particular element of the process, a new data set that we haven't worked with before, a new therapeutic area that we haven't worked in, so that we can show that it has a broader approach. Right now, we have worked with cardiovascular on the OHT surgery. Some discussions with orthopedic potentially coming up, diagnostic tests. So there are other areas there that we're looking for that if a company comes to us and says, okay, we'd like to try that area, we're interested. And neurology is the latest area we're talking to now.
Okay. Okay. So I'm curious what you think is what's the most exciting potential? I mean, you already kind of hit on some of the different specifics in the industry, but what do you think are some of the most exciting potentials of real world evidence advancing medical technology and improving patient care?
Yeah, I think it's the I mean speed is really the biggest point here. I mean it's all about the speed. We after all the R&D process took place, and when I got in last year, I worked with the team, and the team is mostly new. We reformed the organization based around that mentality of running like a business, which in the nonprofit space is actually starting to become more in vogue, to demonstrate returns and other things that people normally look for in a business out of a nonprofit organization is not always appropriate, but in our case, it's specifically appropriate because industry wants to see the success. But we took a look and said, okay, well, what are the challenges now facing the industry as it relates to this? And we found really three things that were problematic. Number one was the FDA. Number two are the sponsors themselves. And number three is the data. FDA has, it's very hard for them to deal with real world evidence. They get data thrown at them from all different angles. They're not sure, how it's collected. They've told stories about high school kids being enrolled to collect data in, as part of a sponsor submission and things like that. I don't know if that's true, but it makes it very difficult for them to support this. As a result, companies don't see this as a viable pathway because they see it too risky, and they don't want to proceed down this path, spend 6, 9, 12 months, a smaller investment, not be successful, or still be in a position where they're still going through the process and have to then kick into a clinical study, which they could have started 6 months earlier. It's going to cost them more, but they wouldn't have sunk the cost on the RWA. And then solving for data is the biggest issue because the collection of data in the real world environment, and I'll quote Rob Califf, FDA commissioner. He was at our public forum last year, and he'll be there again in September this year. It's a mess. So it's not done in a way that is conducive to what we're trying to achieve here. So we have solved for the first two issues. We have worked with FDA to develop the NestMark process, which is our process for marking the data as fit for purpose and then fit for evidence support. as a result, industry started to pay attention and say, wow, that actually makes a difference. Because if we can go through that, we can, people like to say fail fast. I like to say succeed quickly.
Yeah.
But they can move down a path and get a point and say, okay, you know what, we tried, or it's working. And therefore they can, they feel much more confident about the process. We're still solving for data. But all of this, leads to speed. And in business, speed is everything. In patients, speed is everything.
So when you say you're still solving for the data, does that mean you're really still trying to establish for this industry or and when I say industry, you mentioned the urology or cardiovascular or orthopedic, pediatric. What does it mean to be solving for the data this side?
So I think that we have a couple of initiatives in play, our Nest Marketplace and Nest Window. What we're trying to do through those is to make data more accessible. And the marketplace is really what we're doing is we're working with all data providers, whether commercially based or institutional based, to really understand what's out there and make it easier for companies that come to us and work with us to quickly see what's out there. Now, from their limited window in especially a small company, for example, they're not going to have vast resources. They can actually come with us and just consult and ask about the data sets that we've worked with, because all of the providers come to us, and many of them are actually under agreement with us to participate in providing more information about their data sets. We have on our website, again, we have a list of all the institutional network providers. It reads like a who's who of the institutions out there today. We work very closely with all the commercial services providers and so on. The Nest window is really designed conceptually, because we're still building that, and that's something that any sponsor that comes to us can help us make it better. The concept in Nest window is you look through the window and you can see what's there. And the idea is that it's not going to give you, detailed access to the data. It's not going to give you the ability to query the data or that sort of thing necessarily in any detail. But what it does is say, if you're sitting with a project in front of you, you believe data is out there, you want to quickly identify it, you can do it through this process. And then you can make a decision, go, no go, on whether you go this approach. Today, that is a challenging process. You can go to a commercial services organization that consolidates data, but they're going to have obviously still a limited slice of what's available out there. You can ring up institutions and see what try to get them to participate and provide information back. It's that piece there is why most people just don't even bother and just keep moving on with the clinical study. So those are the attempts we're trying to make to fix that. And because of our position as a nonprofit between all these groups, everybody is willing to work with us, because it's not like I'm a commercial service provider and asking to have an institution sign up. They're willing to do it because they understand and have a stake in our outcome.
So I'm just trying to wrap my head around this because this is actually really cool. So I mean, I feel very slow today. I apologize for that. So you when you say those service providers, are you talking about Epic or the healthcare, all the different ones that are everything that happens in a hospital, potentially like through a surgery? For example, maybe there's a medical device company that wants to improve arthroplasty outcomes or something like that, and they're not sure what data is collected even, or maybe they have an idea, but you would have a better window into all of those things because of your relationships with which service providers, and how does that work? I'm just one layer deeper.
So that actually points more to the Nest window process. Now, Epic and companies like that, don't sell the data. So they, obviously,
Yeah.
so it would be companies, either the underlying institution that has the data and has developed a method for making it available, or not for that matter, because we can work with them. There are institutions that have developed their own data organizations that are responsible for commercializing their data and making it available. So those would be examples of that. So that's more of the Nest Windows side. Then there are commercial services providers, which are the companies that are out there working with MedTech today, in either selling them data like a HealthVerity or companies like that. They providing clinical study capabilities like an IQVIA or an Etienne or that sort of thing. There's a lot of those organizations, and we work with all of them to better understand our process so that they can actually provide that to their clients and have their clients come back into them. So that would be more of the Nest Mark process, which is the process for marking the entire data and evidence. The window is much more to the data providers, and we work with a number of organizations out there to and to be clear, window is in concept stage at this point. It was after last year's evaluation of the challenges, we focused first on getting FDA and industry to a place where they were comfortable to start to move forward and try things, which was enormously successful on both sides, very supportive, both within the FDA and within the industry. But at the end of the year, we still realize that even with both sides comfortable, if there's not an easy access to good looking data, they're challenged to get an outcome that is going to be satisfactory. So that's when Nest Window was born, and that's something we're really focused on. Now, ideally, it's a buy versus build. Now, I don't have a huge budget because, as I mentioned, I get paid through the MDUFA fees. But we're hoping to take advantage of underlying capabilities that are already out there today, such that we can provide that access to the data quickly, and so people can understand what's there.
Really exciting. I appreciate all the work that you're doing on all of this. I'm curious if there's one quick key message that you would want our listeners to take away from the Nest and the power of real world evidence. What would that one message be?
I think it's really to have another look at Nest, or have a look at Nest. I think that's the most important thing. Nest in its first iteration worked with a lot of companies in terms of the testing and so on, but they perhaps didn't see what the potential outcome of that was. In the last, we're just entered the second year of MDUFA 5 funded. We've had enormous success in actually getting submissions done, which ultimately is what companies want, and that's what they wanted from us, all along. And so we're very heavily supportive of that. I often go to conferences and I ask everyone in the room to put their hand up if they've heard of Nest, and all the hands go up. I then ask them to keep their hand up if they know what Nest does, and most of them go down. So we're trying to get that message out there through attending conferences and venues like this, because they really need to take notice and take a look at their situation and say, okay, how many real world evidence potential projects do we have within the organization? How many of would we have passed over just because we understand the complications, and that and if we knew there was a way to get it done more efficiently, would we take that path? And we're evolving the process. The Nest Mark originally started last year. We had one partner that we worked with to help us develop and deliver, because we're a very lean organization. We outsource everything to make sure that we keep our costs down. And then sponsors obviously have to cover the costs of the outsourcing that relates to their particular project, which is fair, because we don't want MDUFA fees to go to pay for an individual company. It pays for our R&D that benefits all companies. But as we move forward, we're looking to make that load lighter and lighter and lighter, to ultimately where we can work with a company on a very light touch basis, and they can use the Nest Mark going into their submission and then ultimately into FDA, such that the FDA sees it and says, okay, well, if I have 100 checkboxes I have to go through on my review process, 10 of them are already checked by the Nest Mark being there. Now that's a gross oversimplification, but those 10 checkboxes on the data can be the difference between 6, 12, 18 months worth of negotiations in a submission. So if we can solve for that piece right up front, then it gets down to the actual claim and the validity of the claim, which of course we don't get involved in. But we do stay with the projects that we work all the way through post-submission to make sure that we're providing all the support we can. And that does speed things up too.
That's really great. I really appreciate it. We'll include in the links or in the show notes different links to get a hold of Simon, but also to be able to get a hold of the Nest and learn more about this. But Simon, where would the best place for people to go to learn more about you and about the program?
Well, our website, which I believe is still nestcc.org. So,
Okay.
So that's or MDIC.org, which is our parent organization that we sit underneath. We're sort of a self-contained operating unit within those. We have our annual public forum coming up in September. It's a great way to actually, in DC, great way to come. And we do that, MDIC does that every year, and we participate. And actually this year, FDA is actually doing their public forum as part of the MDUFA commitment within the our annual public forum, which is great because we're combining the two. And it's a great opportunity to meet with all the FDA folks and also with us. in September. That's on our website as well. So I think those are probably the best way to do this. And then I think we'll probably put our standard Nest email address in the contact details when you post this.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very good. Thank you so much. Really appreciate all of the information. Thank you for coming on and sharing all of this. Any last pieces of advice or thoughts?
No, call us.
All right. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Um,
much. Those of you who've been listening, thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.